Okay, YouTubers, this is Joe from ArtAlienTV. Now today we're going to do a quick recap of a video I did about a week or so ago. Oh, in fact it was a month ago. How long before Mars gets robbed? Art thieves. Now if you haven't watched this video, I'll put a link to it at the end of this video. There'll be a card link, you can click straight on that. Other than that, you can just go to my channel and it's right at the top of the page here on my channel front page, okay? If you're a returning subscriber. You'll see that, okay? So I do recommend you watch that, but failing that, I will touch on some of that again anyway, very briefly. And I'm going to show you loads of different clips of stuff. I've got some video footage here of Elon Musk talking on The Late Show, but this was back in 2015. But basically, there's been a load of articles recently in the last few days about this, and there's also these Nuke Mars t-shirts that have come up all over the net, and they're being sold on his website here. I'm not advertising for him. I don't believe you should buy these at all. This is insanity, absolute insanity. Basically, he's proposing that we nuke Mars to warm up the atmosphere by letting off nuclear devices above the North and South poles. Elon Musk wants to drop nuclear bombs on Mars. Now you can read this. I've just highlighted a very small part of it here. Musk believes that by hitting Mars with nuclear weapons, the planet's polar ice caps could melt and release vast amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which would essentially create a greenhouse effect that raises the temperature and air pressure of the planet, like a really quick version of climate change. Right. Musk has shared his opinion for years, dating back to interviews with the billionaire from 2015, which this is. I'm just going to play you some of that now. Hopefully I won't get into trouble for this if I just play you a part of this interview. Okay. This was recorded in 2015, so this isn't new. I'm not claiming this is a new theory by him. He's been proposing this for years now. What I'm doing is trying to work out how this would actually work and whether it would actually make the situation worse on Mars and perhaps even cool it down. Now, depending on your point of view. Now, of course, if these proposed nukes were to be let off above the poles, now of course the poles are covered in ice, a lot of carbon ice, frozen carbon dioxide, but also water ice, CO2 ice, frozen below that. Now, so there's layers of ice. We've got the carbon ice over the top, and we have normal ice like we have on Earth below that. Now, what would happen if you actually melted that carbon ice? It would release a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But Mars is quite a small planet. Now, if you were to let off lots of large nuclear devices on the surface of Mars, it would create a lot of dust in the atmosphere, a great deal of dust, which could hang around for years. And what would happen then is it could cause global cooling. Now, I've got some articles here to back this up. Now, of course, it really depends where these devices were exploded. Now, I've got a couple of articles up here. Now, how much has nuclear testing contributed to global warming? This is from Skeptical Science. I'm not going to read all this out now. This is quite complex. But what I'm trying to do here is work out whether his theories are actually valid or not. I mean, they could well be. I'm not saying they're not valid. I just think the main problem for me is that it's a very good way of wiping the slate clean on a planet and destroying any evidence of previous civilization, which there is much of, as I've shown in many, many videos. Basically, it says here, many nuclear tests kick up a lot of dust which reflects sunlight, thereby cooling the Earth. Indeed, according to Turco et al., 1983, that is the dominant effect of nuclear explosions on climate. The result is that nuclear testing is likely to have reflected more energy from the sun than it actually generated, than they generated. That is, nuclear testing is likely to have been a net cooling factor. Now, there's a load of complex stuff here with graphs and loads of people commenting here on this article. So if you want to check that out, you can. But basically, it's a pretty simple concept. If nuclear testing or explosions kick up million or billions of tons of dust into the atmosphere, which they would, of course, then this would cause a nuclear winter. Now, that's why it's called a nuclear winter, but basically because the dust reflects the sun's rays and causes like a kind of shield against the sun, and cools the Earth down, or Mars down, okay? Now, of course, if they were done over the poles, this wouldn't be quite so serious, because there would be a lot less dust on the surface in the polar regions than in the sort of equatorial regions, for instance. Okay, so there was that. So I'm going to link to all these things below if you want to check these out. There's also this article here. The world's glaciers are sponging up loads of nuclear fallout, but you shouldn't worry yet. Right, okay, I'm not going to read out much of this. The world's ice is rapidly disappearing, but not without a trace. Ancient artifacts, frozen corpses, long-dead viruses, and loads of trapped greenhouse gases are the parting gifts left behind as Earth's melting glaciers and permafrost retreat. And now, thanks to ongoing global research, a new and concerning item can be added to that list: nuclear fallout. In a recent survey of glaciers around the world, an international team of scientists discovered elevated levels of fallout radionuclides. Radionuclides, that's it. Yeah. Radioactive atoms that result from nuclear accidents and weapons tests in every single glacier studied. Right, okay, well, why wouldn't there be? You know, that's pretty obvious. Now, basically, there are many factors here which I'm worried about. Now, the main factor, in my case particularly, would be the destruction of evidence of a previous civilization. Now, there's possibly, or quite likely, already been nuclear explosions on the surface of Mars, as I proposed in a video that I did back in 2015, Mars explosion 1941, seen by Pluto's discoverer. Now, if you type that in, if you copy and paste that title, Mars explosion 1941, seen by Pluto's discoverer, and you type it into Google, you get this, and click on images. You get a load of my images come up from my videos on YouTube, on my main channel, ArtAlienTV, and we have this. This is the cover of that video, Mars explosion 1941, and also a load of other things I've got here have come up in the Google Images search here. So basically, there's lots of evidence for previous life on Mars, including this mummified person here, little person. There's statues and mummified people here. There's the tank. There's the battle tank there. Some of these were found by other researchers. There's loads of stuff. There's pyramids. There's domes and structures and weird kind of artifacts and statues and things all over the place. Even carved animals like this one here. This is like a little carved figure of an animal of some unknown species, right? Now, and there's also hundreds of statues and remains all over the place, like we have here. The statues here. There's one of my top videos there, Gods of Mars and Earth Part 2. There's about 20-something statues just in that video, and that's from a few years ago now. So, and I've got hundreds of these things on my channel, not all found by myself. Some of these things were found by other Mars researchers that have contributed their work. Lania Gabor found this one, Martin Graney found this one, the Mars man and woman mummified. Now, but I've got hundreds more. Those are just a few examples. Now, the thing is, if nuclear weapons were let off on Mars, it would destroy much of the evidence that's left. Now, a lot of the evidence that we have seen and that I've shown you already shows signs that it's been melted and destroyed and smashed up. There were obviously some very violent explosions on Mars in the past. Now, the point is, when? Now, this is where I come to Mars explosion 1941. In that video, I showed evidence from Wikipedia here about a guy called Clyde Tombaugh. Now, Clyde Tombaugh was a very eminent astronomer who was born about 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, in fact, in the US, came from Illinois and died in 1997. He built a massive telescope himself and started observing some crazy stuff going on. And in fact, if you scroll right down the page here, there will be a link to this. in 1941, he spotted a huge explosion on the surface. I'll just read this short excerpt out here. I'm not going to read all this out now. You can actually read this bit yourself. If you freeze frame it here, you can read this part. I'm just going to read this bit here. In 1949, Tom Bow had also told the Naval Missile Director at White Sands Missile Range, Commander Robert McLaughlin, they had seen a bright flash on Mars on August 27, 1941, which he now attributed to an atomic blast. Tom Bow also noted that the first atomic bomb tested in New Mexico would have lit up the dark side of the Earth like a neon sign, and that Mars was coincidentally quite close at the time. The implication apparently being the atomic test would have been visible from Mars. Okay, so conversely, a large explosion on Mars is visible from Earth, especially if you're looking at it through a very large telescope. So now this isn't related to what Dr. John Brandenburg has said about, well, it is related, but this guy is a completely different person. Dr. John Brandenburg has suggested there were 2 nuclear explosions above the Mars surface, but many, many millions of years ago. Now I'm suggesting, according to this guy who spotted this with his rather large homemade telescope from his garden shed, I think it was, he saw a massive explosion on Mars in 1941. Now, does that mean that there was a nuclear explosion on Mars then? Or was it something else? It could well have been a huge meteor. There are lots of impact areas on Mars and the craters all over the place. I mean, it's obviously been quite active in that respect. But could it also have been what Dr. John Brandenburg has proposed, that there were nuclear explosions on Mars? Now, Brandenburg says they were many millions of years ago, in fact maybe a billion years ago. But what if they weren't? Or what if it wasn't? What if it was only 1941 or in the 1940s? There could have been a number of these explosions on the surface, and Clyde may have only seen this one. There may have been a whole plethora of them. There could have been multiple explosions on the surface, likely a war, perhaps. And when you look at the debris on Mars, there is evidence for this all over the place. We have this thing here, car found in Mars, not Elon Musk's Tesla. I put this video up in March last year, 2018. Let's play a little bit of that. I'm not going to play much of these. I'm just going to show you little excerpts of some of these things. Now, this to me looks very much like a car, and it wasn't my find actually. There's a link in the description below to the person who found it. It's found by another Mars and Moon researcher like myself. Now if you look very carefully, you can actually see the tread on the wheel on the left here. There's a negative of it there. Now, when you look at the close-ups, pay attention to the shape. You've got the roof here, you've got a wheel sticking out here, there's a wheel arch there, and then there's another wheel arch there. Now this is a very poor quality image, I think taken by the Spirit rover. So this was taken thousands of miles away from where the Curiosity rover is now, to the north, I think, to the northeast. I'm not sure, it's to the north of the Curiosity rover anyway. I can't remember whether it's east or west now, because there was the opportunity as well. But basically this is thousands of miles away. And there's also a bunch of wreckage in front of it here. Now, whether this shows all that, it should do in a second. Now you really need to watch this video, because in the actual video I go into a bit more detail. It's actually got a number plate on the back here, and a bumper, which you can see earlier on in the video, and I zoom right into it, right in close. And it's highly reflective, it looks metallic. So we've got these wheel arches, got a wheel arch there, we've got a wheel arch here, and it even got a tyre sticking out with thick tread on it. Off-road tread. Okay, so check that out. You know, a lot of people have disputed it, but I still maintain that this is good evidence. And there are other vehicles on the surface, including this thing that I found in Gale Crater. A lot of you may have seen this. This looks like a boat wreck, just here. Okay. Now there is a picture of it further back, actually, which might be slightly clearer. We're a bit close to it there. Hang on. Yeah, that's better. Now let's go back a bit. I'm a little bit over zoomed here. There we are. And we have what looks like a boat wreck at the bottom of the Mount Sharp. Now, there are loads of these by Mount Sharp, and in fact, a lot of people have said this, and I do agree now that this is possibly 2 boat wrecks that have crashed into each other. We've got one behind here and another one kind of here as well. And there's this strange kind of big kind of square-ish looking structure sticking out of it as well. Very odd indeed. We've got a cabin here all kind of crushed and broken. Now, so it does look like there was already some massive explosions on Mars, which have affected many of the artifacts in Gale Crater. And then we have things like this. Now, this was taken by the Opportunity rover. This is a new image of the Mars battle tank, which I've brightened up a lot more than the original image. So if you want to see that in more detail, just look up Mars battle tank and it'll come up. This was actually found a couple of years ago, but not by me, by another researcher who showed it to me. I was very impressed, and I thought, wow, you know, basically it's a battle tank. It's even got wheels. It's got a kind of petrol tank there on the back, by the looks of it, a bit like some older tanks on Earth used to have. It's got a turret, it's got the gun, and it's got a commander's copula there, a hatch there, with other details there. Very interesting indeed. But it's not as big as this T-34 here. It's about a third, or between half and third the size of this. Okay, so many of these things are quite small, including this car. This car is also quite small, about half the size or less than one on Earth. Okay, so they're much smaller. So we've also got things like this. Now, this is a good example of a structure that is almost untouched by such a massive explosion because of its ballistic shape. This is on Mount Sharp. This is on the lower slopes of Mount Sharp. It's about 1 kilometre or 2 up, about 1.5, I think, and was taken from a distance of a couple of miles away, but the camera zoomed in, and we can see there's quite astonishing detail here of a pointed dome with other structures kind of built into it, onto the side of it here, like these block structures. Very interesting. This is one of the clearest buildings you will ever see on Mars that has ever been shown. Okay, and there are multiple other similar weird structures as well. Some of them don't look that obvious to start with, but a lot of them are heavily damaged and blown to pieces. And add to that a load of kind of dust and debris that's kind of covered everything. And that's what you get. You get a lot of damaged, ruined, and dilapidated remains of buildings. And then you have anomalies like this. This was also taken by the Opportunity rover, not very far from that tank I just showed you, in fact. I would say less than a kilometre away. This may be the remains of perhaps the person that drove that tank or commanded that tank. Who knows? It's close enough for it to be that. It may just well be. It probably isn't, but I couldn't tell you. I'm just kind of pontificating here. It may be, maybe not. Who knows? But this is the remains of a Martian, and you can clearly see the eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, an earring, hair, what looks like a head injury here. It's all there. All the detail is there. All you've got to do is brighten the image up. I've colour filtered it, obviously, to make it stand out on YouTube, which you have to. But it's there. It's definitely there. You can see the nose and the teeth here, even in the raw image. So check that out. Mummified people found on Mars, remains and statues. That was a video I uploaded only a few days ago. In fact, there's loads of evidence of humanoid type remains on the surface of Mars, including this, which was found in Gale Crater. Now, these are different angles of the same thing, taken on different sols, different days, and you've got 3 different images there. There's a little one there, this one here, and this one here, all of the same head. Okay, so it's highly likely that this is actually a head, and it's not just a case of pareidolia, because there are 3 angles of it. You've got one from in front, further away, one from the sort of from the side here, a bit closer, and then an even closer one here, almost front on. And we got some very interesting details, very puggish looking, as a lot of the Martians were. They were quite small, a lot of them, between 1 and 3 feet, a lot of them, dwarf-like people, and some of them were quite scary looking. And then, of course, you have massive giant ones like this skull here, which appears in a lot of my videos as an outro. Let's play that bit. Yeah, actually I want the bit before it. Okay, there we are. And this is actually fossilized into the side of the rock here, In Gale Crater, and that's from Sol 707. It's a fossilized giant skull. Now this is approximately 18 inches to 24 inches from here to here. It's around 20 inches. Massive. This thing is so large and would have been so scary that it could have bitten your head clean off in one bite. Quite easily bitten your head clean off, this thing. But it seems that the giant Martians probably died out millions of years ago, because this is the only one of the, well, there are a couple of specimens I found like this. This isn't the only one. There is another one, but with more flesh on it, mummified. But I've only found two this size. Most of the skulls that I've found and other people have found are actually quite small and more sort of human size or smaller. And some of them look very odd indeed. We've got loads of stuff in here. So if you want to check out this one, this video out, this was only put up a few days ago. Mummified people found on Mars. It's just a short compilation, about 5 minutes long, of things that I found on the Mars surface. This was also found by the near the Opportunity Rover. This one here, this is kind of a pile of rocks. Now a lot of these piles of rocks contain fossils and remains, mummified and fossilized, dehydrated and preserved in the very cold, dry atmosphere on the surface. Now the problem is, if Elon Musk was to let off a whole bunch of nuclear weapons on Mars, it may destroy what remaining evidence there is, or a lot of it, completely. Especially these exposed artifacts like vehicles and skulls and statues and things like this. It may destroy the evidence we have completely, and perhaps only things like this dome on Mount Sharp might survive because of its ballistic shape. Okay, so what I'm proposing here is that I don't think Elon Musk realizes, or does he? Does he know that there are thousands and thousands of artifacts on Mars that need to be investigated and recorded in great detail as not only proof of alien life, but proof of previous alien cultures on Mars, and perhaps some of them may have even come from other planets in our solar system or elsewhere. So Mars may actually contain halls of records. There may, under some of these structures on the surface, there may be, inside this building for instance, this may contain evidence, this building inside, of the whole history of Mars. There may be written records, carvings and pictures and pictograms and all sorts of things inside this this structure here. Now this is over 300 foot tall, this thing. It's huge. This is almost the size of one of the pyramids at Giza, I would say. Not quite as big as the main pyramid, but possibly as big as the second pyramid there. This is massive. Okay? And these are likely to contain records of the entire history of Mars, or at least some of it. And nuking Mars is a very premature and idiotic proposal, in my opinion, because not only may it destroy the evidence on the ground, the remaining evidence on the ground, but it also may backfire and actually cause global cooling, because some of the climate models that these people have been brainwashed with are kind of convincing them that global warming works in a very sort of simple way. But in fact, if you're going to kick up loads of dust on the surface by letting off a massive explosion, or a whole bunch of explosions, then it may well have the opposite effect and actually cool the climate down rather than warm it up. This is obviously open for debate. I mean, I'm not a climatologist. I'm just trying to use a bit of logic and common sense here on a subject which is being kind of hyped up at the moment a lot. And is it really worth risking losing all these artifacts, statues and remains and buildings, and structures, and pyramids, and wrecked vehicles, and skulls, and carved animals, and possible plant life like this mushroom thing here. This probably was some kind of plant life here, or at least some kind of fossilized plant life like coral or something. There's loads of this stuff in Gale Crater, and there are things like heads and helmets and statues and stuff all over the place. And nuking the surface of Mars may completely ruin it and destroy all this evidence. And maybe that's what he wants to do. Maybe he wants to wipe the slate clean so that he can start a new Earth colony there. And by nuking all the evidence and getting rid of it, then the people that go there wouldn't ever see any of it, because most of it would be obliterated, and the records would be wiped clean. Possible ancient records inside structures like this, going back millions of years, which could actually tell us the entire history of our solar system, not just the history of Mars and the various cultures that lived there, because there were a number, some quite advanced, some not so advanced. But of course, if there were wars there, some of these advanced cultures may have died out and killed themselves in a nuclear war. It's highly possible. And what may be left now are just a few small critters underground, like maybe insects and a few lizards and things like that. You know, that may be all that's left on Mars. I haven't really seen any evidence of living stuff on Mars, apart from a few UFOs, which may of course be just drones. So there's very little evidence of any living stuff on Mars, unfortunately, up close evidence, although there are many, many buildings up in the northern hemisphere, which I've shown many times in previous videos. So what I'll do, I'll leave it there really, because this was just a kind of overview. I'll put links to all these things apart from that. I'll put links to that video and this page here, and the Clyde Tombaugh link from Wikipedia. This is very important because this gives us a date. Now, I discovered this article here, and it was only uploaded a few days before. This came up in my Google alerts, this did, when this was published. Someone put this up on the Wikipedia literally the day before. It came up in my Google alerts back in 2015, January 2015, and I did a video on it the next day. So I was the first person to actually notice this article and do anything about it and actually expose it, because this may be when the war ended on Mars. Or it could have even gone on for years after this. There may have been a war going on for 10 or 15 years on the surface. We simply don't know. And what we need to do is get inside some of these structures with drones. The new rovers are going to have, some of the new rovers will have drones. What we need to do is fly them inside some of these structures and check out if there are any written records, because I think there will be. In fact, I think there will be vast records carved and painted and written inside some of these giant structures on the surface of Mars. That's what we need to do. So this is an appeal to Elon Musk. Please don't nuke Mars. At least not until we've actually had a good look round for about 50 or 100 years, and let us record and document these amazing structures and possible records and artwork and artifacts and wrecked vehicles and all these incredible things, which may contain extremely important technology which could advance our civilization massively. So this is an appeal to Elon Musk. Please do not nuke Mars. It's premature and could ruin what remains or left. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you soon.